Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, one of you asked us to explore the ideas of P.D. Ouspensky. Really fascinating stuff, sometimes a bit challenging, specifically from his book, The Fourth Way.
Mm,
So think of this as maybe your shortcut to some pretty mind-opening perspectives on who you are, what you might be capable of.
exactly. Yeah, the material you shared was really rich, quite a lot there. And our mission really is to cut through it, pull out the core insights, those aha moments,
Right.
the kind that can give you a completely fresh way of looking at yourself, your potential for growth, without getting totally bogged down in complex
And
theories.
believe me, there is a lot there. We're talking about, well, everything from the basic nature of our being to consciousness,
Yeah.
and even practical techniques for looking at yourself, self-investigation, and, the possibility of real interchange.
It's deep stuff.
It really is.
Wow.
So our goal today is pretty simple. Just illuminate the key concepts from Ouspensky that might offer you a brand new lens,
Yeah.
a new way to see yourself and the world.
Okay.
Let's do it. All right, let's dive in. So one of the first kind of big ideas is this notion of the incomplete being. Have you ever felt, like you're not quite living up to your potential, like there's more to you that's untapped?
Well, what's fascinating here is Ouspensky's point that this feeling is actually, well, it's the normal human condition. He suggests that in our everyday state, we're operating way below what's really possible for us.
Okay.
And this involves taking a really hard look at what we value, what drives us, and maybe realizing that a lot of our deeply held beliefs might actually be illusions, things that keep us limited.
Illusions. Okay. Right. And from that comes this idea that's maybe a little startling at first, that we're all essentially asleep.
Hmm?
Now, this isn't literally unconscious, right? But think about those times you've gone through your day on pure habit, almost like autopilot.
Yeah, totally.
Ouspensky argues that state of unawareness is actually our default setting. And the ultimate goal is to, well, wake up from it. But here's where it gets really interesting. He suggests that in this sort of sleepy state, individuals, he calls them man 1, 2, and 3, they don't actually do things, not in the way we usually think.
Right. And this really challenges our everyday sense of control, doesn't it?
It really does.
Ouspensky's argument is that at these levels of being, everything just happens to us. Our so-called decisions, our actions, they're largely driven by outside influences and our own, ingrained mechanical reactions.
Mechanical.
That really makes you wonder, how much of what we think we're choosing is actually under our conscious direction at all.
It's almost humbling, isn't it? We go through life feeling like we're the ones making all these choices, but this view suggests we're more like, I don't know, sophisticated machines just responding to inputs.
Yeah. And the capacity to genuinely do, to exercise real conscious will, that's apparently linked to higher levels of being man 5, 6, and 7, as he puts it.
Okay, so if we can't really do in this sleepy state, what's the first step towards this awakening then? That brings us to self-study, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the journey towards waking up, towards reaching those higher levels, it starts with a really honest and rigorous self-examination.
Okay.
And a central piece of this is self-remembering. Ouspensky really emphasized this, saying it's a concept that's largely missing from, traditional Western philosophy and psychology. He found that quite remarkable.
Self-remembering. Okay, so what is that exactly? It sounds a bit abstract. Is it like mindfulness or something?
Well, it's similar to mindfulness in a way. Yes, it involves that present moment awareness. But self-remembering has this specific extra component.
Yeah.
It's the effort to be aware of yourself at the same time as you're aware of something else, your surroundings, your thoughts, your feelings. It's an active attempt to kind of jolt yourself awake from the sleep of, well, identification, considering negative emotions, all the stuff that usually runs the show.
Awesome.
Even just a brief flash of that dual awareness of self and other, that's considered a moment of awakening.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like trying to hold on to a sense of I am here while also noticing what's happening around me or inside me. So how does general self-study fit in?
Self-study in this system, it starts with a really unflinching look at our inner world. And it begins, interestingly, with observing our own tendencies towards lying and creating illusions about ourselves.
Lying.
Yeah, Ouspensky famously defines psychology as the study of lying. The crucial first step is to really try and separate these self-deceptions, these stories we tell ourselves, from objective facts about ourselves.
Okay.
Because until we see how we consistently fool ourselves, we can't really grasp anything genuinely true or learn anything really new about who we are.
So it's about peeling back all those layers, all the stories we've built up.
Precisely. And this self-investigation also involves recognizing our mechanicalness, those automatic, habitual patterns that run so much of our behavior, and coming to the perhaps unsettling realization that the I we talk about all the time, it isn't a single fixed thing.
The I isn't fixed. Okay, hang on. Let's unpack this. Because it certainly feels like there's a consistent me here, you know.
Well, what's fascinating is the idea that what we call I is actually more like a collection, a whole crowd of many different I's. They're constantly shifting, often totally unaware of each other. And these different I's, they tend to kind of group together based on different situations, different life circumstances. Think of them as the various roles we unconsciously play all day long.
Roles. You mean like how I act when I'm at work is different from when I'm hanging out with friends?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
You might have one set of eyes that takes charge in your professional life, very serious, focused maybe, then a completely different set when you're with family, more relaxed, maybe more emotional, and another when you're socializing.
Right.
These different clusters of eyes, they show up as these distinct roles. And interestingly, Ouspensky pointed out, we're often much better at noticing these shifts in behavior, these different personalities in other people than we are in ourselves.
That totally resonates. Yeah, I can definitely see how my colleague acts so differently in front of the boss compared to when we're just chatting, grabbing coffee.
Yeah.
So if this I is so fragmented, what does that mean for our sense of self, for our ability to grow?
Well, this leads us straight to a really important distinction Ouspensky makes. The difference between knowledge and being.
Knowledge and being, okay.
Being in this system refers to your fundamental essence, everything that you are at your core, separate from what you know intellectually. Knowledge, on the other hand, is just that information you've acquired.
Right.
And true inner development, Ouspensky argues, needs work on both aspects. You need to increase your knowledge and transform your being.
Okay, but why is working on being so crucial then? Can't I just, learn more and more things and become a better, more capable person through knowledge alone?
Well, the key insight here is that the knowledge you can truly understand and use effectively, it's limited by your current level of being.
Oh.
If you try to cram more and more knowledge into a being that hasn't evolved, that hasn't changed, that knowledge can get distorted. It can be misapplied, maybe even used for negative things. It's a bit like, imagine pouring really fine wine into a dirty glass.
Right. It doesn't really help the wine, does it?
Exactly. It won't improve the wine. So it's not just about collecting information.
So it's about fundamentally changing who I am at my core so I can actually hold and integrate that knowledge properly. That sounds like much deeper work.
It is. It's a more profound kind of process. And to understand the mechanics of it, the system introduces this idea of 4 relatively independent beings or minds within us.
4?
Yeah. The instinctive, the moving, the emotional, and the intellectual. Each one has its own specific job, its own function, and they can operate quite separately from the others.
4 independent minds running the show. Wow, that sounds potentially chaotic. Like it could lead to a lot of internal conflict.
It can seem that way, yeah. And that internal friction is often a result of our mistaken belief that we are just a single, unified mind. A crucial understanding here is that each of these centers can function independently.
Okay.
Like your instinctive center handles breathing, digestion, basic bodily stuff. It doesn't need your intellect telling it what to do. A common source of problems comes up when we try to force one center to do the work of another.
Like trying to solve emotional problems just with logic.
Exactly. Or trying to think your way through a physical task instead of letting the moving center handle it. That's where things get messy.
Okay, I can definitely see how that could lead to a lot of frustration, inefficiency. So with all these different parts working inside us, where does consciousness actually fit into this picture?
Well, Ouspensky argues that in our ordinary state, we're largely governed by mechanical laws. We just react automatically. External stimuli, internal urges. We're driven by ingrained habits, associations.
Right, the autopilot again.
Pretty much. Attaining consciousness is directly linked to a gradual liberation from this mechanicalness. It leads to a greater degree of genuine freedom, real choice, less dictated by these accidental, automatic reactions.
So consciousness means less autopilot, more actual conscious decision-making in our lives.
Precisely. However, and this is a big however, the very first and maybe the most difficult step towards achieving consciousness is recognizing that we are not conscious. not in our usual state.
That sounds paradoxical.
It does. But Ouspensky stressed that the illusion of being awake and aware when we're mostly mechanical is one of the most deeply ingrained things. It's incredibly challenging to overcome. It's like living in a dream and absolutely believing it's real.
It's like that saying, right? The fish is the last to know water. We're just so immersed in the state of unawareness, we don't even realize it's water.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned identification earlier. How does that tie into this state of sleep?
Identification. It's presented as a fundamental psychological mechanism that we're usually completely oblivious to. Think about when you get totally engrossed in a movie.
Oh, yeah.
Or a sports game, or even an argument. You become totally absorbed, you almost lose yourself in the experience. Ouspensky uses the analogy of a cat completely fixated on its prey, utterly identified with the hunt.
Right.
We experience similar states of complete immersion in all sorts of things in our lives.
I know that feeling, getting totally lost in a great book or an intense conversation. Is that always a bad thing in this system?
Not necessarily bad in itself, no.
Yeah.
But Ouspensky points out a really significant downside. Identification is strongly linked to negative emotions.
Oh.
It acts like a channel, almost. It allows negative feelings to take root and just drain our vital energy. Learning to stop identifying, to create a little bit of distance between you and what you're experiencing, that's key to conserving and directing your energy. But it's not easy. It requires consistent practice, especially in moments that aren't super emotionally charged, to build that muscle, to prepare us for when stronger reactions hit.
So it's about creating a bit of mental space between an event and my reaction to it. That leads to the idea of considering. What does Ouspensky mean by that?
Right, considering. He distinguishes between two types, external and internal. External considering is a conscious effort. It's actually a form of self-remembering applied in our interactions with other people.
Okay.
It involves actively taking their perspectives, their needs, their feelings into account, trying to do what's pleasant or helpful for them, even if it's something kind of neutral or maybe even slightly inconvenient for you. It's about moving beyond just our own self-absorption when we're with others.
It's about genuine empathy, acting with awareness of others, not just being stuck in my own world.
Exactly that. Internal considering, on the other hand, that's when we're so consumed by our own thoughts, our worries, our self-talk, that we basically just walk all over other people emotionally without even realizing it. Yeah. We're so preoccupied with our internal drama that we become totally oblivious to the people right in front of us. Ouspensky suggests we tend to do way too much internal considering and not nearly enough external considering. And that actively practicing external considering is actually a powerful tool for developing a self-remembering itself.
Interesting. So focusing on others can paradoxically help us become more aware of ourselves. Now, shifting gears a bit, the outline mentions understanding and needing a new language.
Yeah, understanding. Within this framework, it's way more than just intellectual comprehension. It's seen as a holistic function. It involves all four of our centers, instinctive, moving, emotional, and intellectual, all working together in harmony.
All four working together.
Right. Each center has its own way of knowing, you could say. And true understanding arises when these different forms of knowing integrate, when they inform each other.
So it's not just about thinking something through logically, it's also about feeling it, sensing it, having a kind of full-bodied awareness of it.
Precisely. And because people exist at different levels of being, and they possess different amounts and types of knowledge, they often, effectively, speak different languages, even when they're using the exact same words.
That explains a lot of arguments.
Doesn't it? It leads to frequent misunderstandings. And this is why Ouspensky suggests that a right school, a structured environment for this kind of inner work, would actually teach a common language, a shared vocabulary, a shared understanding of these principles, specifically to facilitate genuine communication and mutual comprehension among the people involved.
That makes a ton of sense. If we're all just interpreting the world through our own limited filters, we definitely need some common ground, a framework to truly connect on a deeper level. What about attitudes? The outline mentioned positive and negative ones.
Right, attitudes. Here, positive and negative aren't primarily about our emotional feelings, like feeling happy or sad about something. It's more about our intellectual stance towards knowledge, towards this system of ideas itself, and towards the actual work of self-development.
Okay, so intellectual stance.
Yeah. A positive attitude in this context means openness, acceptance, a willingness to engage and learn. A negative attitude implies skepticism, rejection, closed-mindedness, basically shutting the door before you even peek inside.
So it's about approaching these ideas with an open mind versus being immediately dismissive, just saying, nah, that's weird.
Generally, yes. Ouspensky emphasizes that we do have some degree of control over these intellectual attitudes, even if we can't always control our immediate emotional reactions. And he cautions particularly against adopting a negative attitude towards the very work of self-improvement.
Why is that so important?
Because it can severely block your ability to understand anything or make any progress. While critical thinking is definitely important, a fundamental negativity towards the core principles themselves, that's likely going to be a major roadblock.
Okay, that's a useful distinction. Now, the difference between moral sense and morality, that sounds of another important clarification.
It is. Ouspensky distinguishes between what he calls the permanent moral sense, which he suggests is maybe an innate, perhaps even universal feeling of right and wrong, and the often shifting, culturally dependent definitions of morality. What's considered good or bad behavior varies a lot across different societies and times.
Right, like rules and codes.
Exactly. Conscience, then, is defined as something more immediate. It's an emotional feeling of truth or rightness in a specific situation. It's linked to consciousness, but it manifests through our emotional center.
Okay, so moral sense is like an internal compass is maybe always there, pointing true north, while morality is like the local maps we draw, which can change.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
And conscience is that gut feeling when we're about to ignore the compass or go off the map.
That captures it pretty well.
Yeah.
He also points out that those states of identification we talked about in our busy imaginations, they can often cloud our judgment. They shut us off from those moments of conscience, making it harder to recognize and act on our inner sense of truth.
Okay, now buffers. That sounds like something we definitely need to understand, especially if they block progress.
Buffers, yeah. They're described as internal defense mechanisms, psychological blind spots, almost like walls inside us that prevent us from seeing ourselves objectively.
Walls?
Yeah. They operate based on the often flawed assumptions we hold about ourselves, our abilities, our knowledge, our very being. The really insidious thing about buffers is that they tend to be quite fixed, quite permanent in people at lower levels of being. They consistently shield us from recognizing uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Like built-in excuses.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Built-in excuses, justifications, ways of smoothing over contradictions, and this rigidity is a major obstacle to growth because real change requires seeing ourselves as we actually are, warts and all.
So they keep us stuck in our current patterns by preventing us from seeing the need to change.
Precisely. They prevent us from noticing our own contradictions, our own inconsistencies. And closely linked to this concept is another crucial distinction, the one between our true I and what Ouspensky calls false personality.
False personality. Well, that sounds significant.
It is. Very. The I, in this context, represents our potential for genuine growth. It's the core essence, the part of us that can develop and awaken. False personality, on the other hand, is described as a kind of artificial construct.
Artificial.
Yeah, like a collection of lies we tell ourselves. Useless habits, superficial eyes that don't actually contribute to our real development. And this false personality often mistakenly claims attributes like having a strong will or being self-conscious, things it doesn't actually possess.
So it's a bit like the ego, maybe, the part of us that puts on a facade for ourselves and for the world.
There are definitely similarities, yeah. But Ouspensky cautions against a simplistic kind of labeling, where we just conveniently say, oh, all the parts I like, that's my true I, and all the parts I don't like, that's false personality.
All right. Too easy.
Exactly. A genuine understanding requires a much more objective, discerning assessment of what truly serves our growth and what actually hinders it. It's not just about preference.
This is getting really insightful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the magnetic center. That sounds, well, it sounds positive, at least.
It is generally seen that way, yes. The magnetic center is described as an inherent attraction, maybe an interest, towards what are called influences B.
Influences B.
Yeah, things like insightful books, meaningful art, philosophical ideas, things that can naturally draw us towards further knowledge and deeper understanding. It acts a bit like an internal compass,
Okay.
guiding us towards information that resonates with a deeper part of ourselves, something that sparks our curiosity about these bigger questions.
So if I find myself constantly drawn to certain kinds of books or podcasts like this one, exploring these deeper questions,
Yeah.
That could be my magnetic center at work.
Exactly. That's a good way to think about it. And a developing magnetic center, one that grows stronger, can eventually lead us to encounter influence C.
Influence C, what's that?
Right. Influence C is described as conscious instruction coming from a genuine school or perhaps a qualified teacher. Unlike influences B, which we often just stumble upon by chance, influence C is intentionally structured. It's directed specifically towards fostering real inner transformation.
Okay, so the magnetic center helps us find the right kind of guidance and support, maybe when we're ready for more directed growth. And that leads us naturally to schools and the fourth way.
Precisely. A school in this system isn't like a university. It's defined as an organized environment specifically designed for transmitting this higher level knowledge
Right.
to individuals who have reached a certain level of readiness and understanding. Selection is a crucial aspect. Genuine schools typically have ways of discerning who is truly prepared for this kind of intensive inner work.
So yeah, definitely not like signing up for a class at the local community center then.
Not at all, no. Ouspensky suggests there are different levels and types of schools, catering to different stages of development. And he introduces the fourth way as a distinct path. It's different from the traditional ways, the way of the fakir working through the physical body,
Right.
the way of the monk working mainly through emotions, and the way of the yogi focusing on the mind. The fourth way aims for a more integrated, simultaneous development of all aspects of the individual.
All at once.
Kind of, yeah. Seeking to incorporate the strengths of the other three ways, but importantly, within the context of everyday life. Living in the modern world, not necessarily retreating to a monastery or an ashram.
Okay, so it sounds like a more balanced approach, maybe more accessible for those of us living, busy modern lives. Now, we can't really talk about Ouspensky without at least touching on the fundamental law of three.
Absolutely not. It's foundational. The law of three states that every single phenomenon, every event, every result, it's the product of the interaction of three distinct but interconnected forces. Not just two, like cause and effect, but three.
Three forces.
And Ouspensky connects this fundamental law to the ray of creation, which is a kind of cosmic map, you could say, or a hierarchy of worlds, all emanating from a single source, the absolute. Each world in this ray, including our Earth, is governed by a different number of laws. Our planet, according to this system, is subject to 48 sets of laws or limitations.
48. Wow. So everything that happens, from the tiniest interaction to huge cosmic events, is a result of these three forces playing out within these sets of laws.
That's the core idea, yeah. And understanding this framework, it helps us see our place within a larger cosmic order. It helps appreciate the inherent challenges, but also the possibilities that come with existing on a planet governed by this particular number of laws. This leads into the concept of the lateral octave of organic life.
An octave of life. That sounds almost
Ew.
musical, or like a different dimension.
He uses musical analogy, yeah, based on scales. This lateral octave begins with the sun as its starting note, its due, and it encompasses the whole development of organic life here on Earth. Within this, Ouspensky introduces the food diagram.
Food diagram.
Yeah, it outlines three interconnected octaves of energy that sustain us. First, ordinary food that we eat. Second, the air we breathe. And third, impressions, all the sensory inputs we receive from the world.
Food, air, and impressions. Okay.
And these energies, they get transformed within us through processes involving what are called shocks.
Shocks. What are these shocks in this context? Like electrical shocks?
No, not literally, more like
Yeah.
conscious interventions or efforts. Self-remembering, for instance, is considered the first conscious shock in this process of inner transformation.
Oh.
It's a deliberate intervention in our normally automatic flow of experience. Similarly, the conscious effort to observe and not identify with negative emotions, that's seen as a crucial second conscious shock.
I see.
These deliberate efforts are necessary to refine the energies we take in, to transform them, and to facilitate our inner development beyond that purely mechanical level.
So consciously trying to be present, trying to manage our emotional reactions. These are key intentional shocks to our internal system that can actually lead to real change.
Interesting. Now, the outline briefly mentions recurrence. That sounds a bit like something out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it? Ouspensky presents recurrence more as a theoretical possibility. It's not necessarily a guarantee of a literal, eternal repetition of every single tiny detail of our lives.
Okay, so not like Groundhog Day, exactly.
Probably not quite that literal, no. He suggests that the degree and the nature of recurrence could vary significantly. It might depend on an individual's level of being, the specific circumstances of their existence. It's not necessarily presented as a fixed, deterministic loop where everything plays out exactly the same way over and over again, no matter what.
So maybe more like certain patterns, certain tendencies might repeat under similar conditions until we manage to reach a higher level of awareness and consciously change them. That's probably a more nuanced way to understand it, yeah. Finally, we had brief mentions of the psychological method, esotericism, and the Lord's Prayer.
Right. The psychological method of thinking, in contrast to just purely logical linear reasoning, emphasizes the inner meaning of things, their interconnectedness. It acknowledges the subjective nature of our minds and how our understanding itself can shift and evolve as our level of consciousness changes.
Okay.
Esotericism, in this context, refers to a deeper inner aspect of humanity and its potential development, operating under specific, often less obvious laws. And regarding the Lord's Prayer, Ouspensky suggests it can actually be interpreted from the perspective of this whole system as a series of principles related to developing the right inner attitude towards a higher power, whatever that means to you, and relating to the gradual growth of this inner esoteric dimension within ourselves.
So it's not just a religious prayer in this view, but could also be seen as a kind of symbolic roadmap for inner development within this particular framework. That's one way you could understand it, looking through the lens of these ideas, yes.
Wow. Okay, that was quite a journey through some incredibly rich and complex ideas. Let's maybe try to distill some of the core takeaways for you, the listener.
Definitely. We've explored that fundamental idea that our ordinary state is one of sleep, right? Where we operate largely on autopilot, subject to the illusion of being in control.
Right.
A key to waking up from that is the practice of self-remembering, actively being aware of ourselves in the present moment. This leads into self-study, where we honestly examine our own lies, our illusions, and begin to understand the fragmented nature of our eyes, those various roles we play unconsciously. And we highlighted that crucial difference between knowledge and being, emphasizing that real growth requires transformation at a deeper level, not just piling up information.
Yeah, and we touched on those 4 internal functions, the energy-draining effects of identification and negative emotions, the importance of consciously considering others, that external considering, and the holistic nature of true understanding involving all those centers. We looked at how our attitudes influence our ability to learn, the difference between our innate moral sense and external morality rules, the self-deceptive nature of buffers.
Those tricky buffers.
Exactly. And the distinction between our potential I and that limiting false personality.
We also introduced the magnetic center as that inner guide towards relevant knowledge, the concept of schools, and the 4th way as structured paths for conscious evolution. Then the foundational law of 3 and its connection to the cosmic ray of creation.
Right.
The lateral octave of organic life, the role of those conscious shocks in our inner transformation, the intriguing theory of recurrence, the psychological method of inquiry, and even that unique perspective on esotericism and the Lord's Prayer.
A lot to think about.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our final thought for you today. Considering all of these ideas we've just discussed, which one resonates most strongly with your own inner experiences, your observations of the world around you? And maybe more provocatively, how might the realization that everything happens, at least in our current state of sleep, how might that subtly shift your approach to your daily life, your goals, your sense of personal agency?
Yeah, that raises a really important question, doesn't it? About where our true effort, our real intention fits into this picture. If we're not always doing in the way we think we are, how can we begin to introduce conscious effort? How can we truly influence our own development? Reflecting on that tension, the tension between our perceived control and these underlying mechanics Ouspensky describes, that might offer some profound new insights into the nature of self-awareness and maybe the genuine possibility of interchange.
Exactly. And if any of these concepts have really sparked a deeper curiosity within you, we definitely encourage you to delve further into Ouspensky's The 4th Way. This deep dive has really just scratched the surface.
Absolutely.
What could be a potentially transformative journey of self-discovery.
Thanks so much for exploring these fascinating ideas with us.
Yeah, thanks.